Hey guys, this is Miss Arlequin, and in this lesson, we're going to be creating a type of poem known as a pantoum. And we're going to have to use a lot of repetition to create this poem. As you're going to see in the lesson, pantoum poems rely very heavily on repetition. All right, so throughout this school year, as we've looked at different poems, we have looked at the way poets can use the structure of a poem to create meaning. Specifically, we have looked at line breaks. Our most famous example is, of course, We Real Cool by Gwendolyn Brooks. Now, in this lesson, we're going to continue to think about how poems can use lines to enhance the meaning of a poem. Now, we're going to focus on that through the lens of repetition. So we're going to explore a form of poetry called a pantoum, which, as I mentioned already, includes a lot of repetition. Pantoums are a really fun format to play with. It looks like it's really hard to do when you first see it, but it's actually not, because it follows a very strict pattern, and as long as you know what the pattern is and you follow it closely, the poem ends up being pretty easy to write. So pantoums consist of 4-line stanzas, which we've talked about in the past. Those are known as quatrains. And within those stanzas, you end up repeating lines throughout. For example, lines 2 and lines 4 of a stanza end up becoming the first and third line of the next stanza, which I know might be blowing your mind right now. You might not be able to picture it, but when you see an example, you're going to see exactly what this looks like. So through this repetition and having the lines, the entire lines repeat in different stanzas, it helps create the rhythmic quality of a pantoum poem. Now, in a traditional pantoum, the lines are grouped into quatrains, 4-line stanzas. They can have any number of quatrains, and the lines may be of any length. Now, traditionally, a pantoum also has a rhyme scheme of A, B, A, B. And so the lines are rhyming alternate, or every other line rhymes with each other. This, of course, if you're going to follow the repetition and the rhyme scheme, makes it a little bit extra hard. It doesn't have to follow the rhyme scheme, though. You could do a more modern pantoum that just has a repetition. Now, a pantoum says everything twice. The second and fourth line of each stanza is then repeated as the first and third lines, respectively, of the following stanza. So the first and third lines of the first stanza are repeated as the second and fourth lines of the last stanza. And that completes the circle. Okay, I know, it sounds really, really confusing. It's much, much easier to understand if you just look at an example. So here's a pretty simple pantoum called Cold. That day was cold when 0 came. We held our breath far in the north. When 0 came, our hearts went still, far in the north and all our years. Our hearts went still, we heard the frost, and all our years beat in our hearts. We heard the frost, we held our breath, beat in our hearts, that day was cold. So you can see how there is constant repetition of entire lines throughout different stanzas. So the original poem is in the black font, and then in the red font, I identified which line is which. All right, so you can actually track it. That day was cold. We held our breath, right? So that actually gets repeated down here in the last stanza. You repeat the first line, we held our breath, gets repeated here. All right, but then you also have the second line. When 0 came, gets repeated here in the next stanza, right? So the second line becomes the first line. Far in the north, the fourth line becomes the third line of the second stanza. And then it's the same thing in this stanza. This is the second line of the second stanza. So our hearts went still, second line, becomes the first line of the next stanza. All right, same thing here. This is the fourth line of the second stanza, and all our years. So that becomes the third line of the following stanza. So again, every stanza repeats 2 of the lines from the stanza that came before. And you can track it throughout the poem. All right, so let's look at 2 more short examples of pantoums so you can see what the traditional pattern of repetition looks like. I specifically chose ones that don't rhyme because, again, they are a little bit easier for some people to write. But I really want to focus on the way the repetition in the poem can emphasize particular ideas. That might be one of the hardest parts about writing a pantoum. You know that the repetition is there, but what are you going to choose to write in those lines that you know are going to be repeated? Obviously, it wouldn't make sense if you know that the second line is going to be repeated. It wouldn't make sense for you to write something insignificant in that line. It's got to be something that you want to have carry over and that'll lead well into the next stanza. All right, so here I'm going to read it. Just pay attention to the repetition. Think about what lines are really being repeated. In the dark. A man outside my window, the cat meowed and purred. I kneel by the fire, the darkness comes soon. The cat meowed and purred, she walked between my legs. The darkness comes soon, the stars will guide my way. She walked between my legs, she ran into the house. The stars will guide my way, I walk the beaten path. She ran into the house, hiding away from me. I walk the beaten path, stone, sand, and shell. All right, so here I actually chose this poem because you may or may not notice that it doesn't really make a lot of sense. This is an example of a student who has followed the proper format, but they haven't really given a lot of consideration to the meaning of their lines. A man outside my house. Nowhere else in the poem does that idea ever come back into play. Who's this man? The next line is about a cat meowing. It has no connection to the man being outside the house. Now, the rest of it, there's some strong imagery that is connected. The darkness coming, the cat meowing, stars guiding their way. But does the cat really match these lines, the darkness and the stars guiding the way? The cat here, she walked between my legs, she ran to the house. Yes, this matches with the cat. But it doesn't match with these other ideas about darkness and stars. And then here, stone, sand, and shell, like, where does that come from? That's like a completely different setting. I never thought anywhere else in the poem that this was like a beachy kind of setting until this last line. So this is an example of a pantoum that is not well developed. Again, this is one of the hardest parts. Really think about what you want to convey and how the lines are going to connect to each other. They can't just be random nonsense, or else you get a poem like this. All right, here's one more short one. Tomorrow is a brand new day. Nothing will remain the same. Changing in a subtle way. Forget all those who are to blame. Nothing will remain the same. The sun is gone but will return. Forget all those who are to blame and all the things they said that burn. The sun is gone but will return. It takes with it the fallen few. And all the things they said that burn, another day begins anew. It takes with it the fallen few, changing in a subtle way. Another day begins anew. Tomorrow is a brand new day. All right, so you can see, hopefully, I hope you can see, that this is a much better example of a pantoum. It actually follows the rhyme scheme, which in a way really does help the rhythm of the poem. And you can see that the ideas do develop. There is a central idea. The imagery is consistent. It matches each other. Much, much more successful than the previous pantoum. Now, to make this assignment a little more fun, for your pantoum, we're going to make it a song lyric pantoum. So I want you to find the lyrics to a song that you love. I want you to select your favorite lines, so at least 4 of them, and you're going to use them in your pantoum. Those lines can be from any part of the song. Of course, the song has to be school appropriate. And then you're going to fill in the rest of the pantoum with your own lines. All right, so you have received a pantoum writing template to help you with the repetition. All right, you've got an example of the pantoum here. And right here is where you're going to write yours. So it's going to be, again, inspired by a particular song. Your poem does not have to be about the same main idea or central idea of the original song, but the lines you choose are going to kind of direct your poem into a certain direction. All right, good luck. We're going to type up after you write it on your template. Your final draft is going to go into Google Drive. You're going to go through Google Classroom. So you're going to open the assignment, create a new document, and type up your poem in its final form.